And just awesome. Okay. So to kick us off, I'm just going to clarify that I will be talking about sort of some general substance use trends, the supports that we have available in Washington County. And I'm really going to focus a lot on what we as parents, caregivers, and role models and adults in the lives of our youth can do to help protect our youth from substance use disorder, from overdose, etc. So that's going to be a lot of what I'm focusing on tonight. And you're going to talk a little bit more specifically later about some fentanyl and vaping. Is that right, Heather? Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. I'll be touching on fentanyl just a little bit in my presentation, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Okay. All right, so the first thing is just to introduce myself. My name is Jenny Moore. I work with the Addictions Program in Washington County's Behavioral Health Department and Health and Human Services. And my job is actually to do presentations, do outreach to the public. A lot of my work involves going into health classrooms and supporting the work of the teachers there by talking with students around substance use disorder, addictions, brain science, all that sort of good stuff. And I get a lot of amazing feedback and information when I'm talking to students that helps me then communicate out to teachers, parents, caregivers, and all of the adults that are concerned with our students' health and well-being. So it's exciting for me to sort of be able to share that information from both sides. Part of the reason that I do this work is that I come from a family with a substance use disorder. When I was growing up, my father had a substance use disorder and mental health disorder. And so I grew up needing a lot of this support and information. So it's really rewarding for me to be able to share this with students and help them through this process and navigate the difficult time of being a teenager. So one of the things I'd like to start, if we go to the first slide here. Oh, yes, and we do have all of our slides translated into Spanish too, so we'll be showing them in English and Spanish as we go along. I'll try not to talk too fast. But the first thing that I want to share is some data. So I just have a few slides to give you sort of a baseline idea of what the data tells us about what's happening with our youth and substance use, and what are the trends in substance use with youth nationally, and then we're going to look at locally. But first, I'd like to just share this picture of the national trends in substance use. And this is 2022 data from a survey called Monitoring the Future. This survey has been conducted since 1975. We've collected national data, self-reported data about substance use from youth in 8th grade, 10th grade, and 12th grade. And a couple of things I'd just like to highlight about the data that we're looking at right now is that historically, and it continues to be the case, that alcohol is the #1 substance used by youth, youth in high school, middle school, etc. And marijuana and cigarettes or electronic cigarettes, vaping, are 2 and 3. Depending on the age range, it varies 2 and 3. But those are the top 3 and have always been the case. And even though substance use overall is declining, we still see those as the top 3 usage. And we also, of course, see that, as you can tell in the data here, illicit drugs and prescription misuse is fairly low. And overall, this picture tells us that the majority of students throughout the country are not using substances. And that message is really important. And I'm going to emphasize that and tell you why, and why this is an important thing for our youth to understand as we go through this presentation tonight. Let's go to the next slide. So what I'd like to share with you now is a picture for you to contrast with what we just saw nationally, and that is our local data. So the Oregon Health Authority does a survey every 2 years called the Student Health Survey. And this is also self-reported data, and they look at 6th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade data. And this shows you what our students are reporting throughout Washington County for substance use. Now, keeping in mind, these are slightly different grades that we're looking at, but we can see that throughout Washington County, self-reported substance use is much lower than it is on the national scale, which is good news for us. And also it reflects the national trend of alcohol as the #1 substance used by youth, and then marijuana and vaping R2 and 3. And something that I like to call out because it's very key to understanding some of the overall risky behaviors among our youth is the rates of gambling among youth. So we do ask on the student health survey about a variety of behavioral health issues, and one of them is gambling rates. Now, we can see that gambling rates among youth are actually quite a bit higher than substance use rates. And this is self-reported data, again, anonymous self-reported data. And one of the things to understand about gambling is that it's not necessarily that it is a problem, because gambling is sort of a normalized activity in our society, but that gambling can be an early indicator of risky behaviors. And it is something that can become an addictive behavior. We do have problem gambling as a recognized use disorder in Oregon and throughout the nation. And it's becoming increasingly concerning for youth because of the availability on apps, gaming, sports betting, etc. It's also highly correlated with depression, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts. And it can be an early indicator of actual increase or potential substance use disorder as well. So it's something to keep an eye on, and something that I like to draw attention to, because while we definitely want to be talking to youth about substance use disorder and use of substances, we also want to be indicating other types of risky behaviors as well. Let's go to the next slide. Another thing that we ask about on the Oregon Student Health Survey is how our youth are doing with their mental and emotional health. And you can see here, this is the exact same scale that we were just looking at for substance use. In other words, all three of the slides that we've been looking at topped out at 50%. And so you can see very clearly that the mental health of our students is, their issues with mental health are much higher rates of self-reported mental health issues than of substance use. This is something that we really need to be working with them on and paying attention to. Depression is high, anxiety, and I'd like to just point out that among 11th graders, almost 50% reported just fair or poor emotional and mental health overall. And we don't want to see those numbers. We want to see them reporting good and very good mental and emotional health. So this is what we really want to be working on with our youth, and something that I spend a lot of time talking with them about. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, now we'd like to share the latest data on overdose rates in our region. And Washington County actually reports overdose rates along with Multnomah County and Clackamas County as a tri-county overdose rates, because some of the reason is because overdose rates, especially among youth, are too low for us to actually share out individually as a county in Washington County, meaning that they're single digits, and we wouldn't actually be able to report out those rates because it would violate private health information. It might make the people who have suffered from a fatal overdose identifiable to someone. So that's important to understand. So even though we do have low overdose rates overall comparatively for youth in our region, it is still higher, obviously, than we'd like it to be. And we want that number down to 0, right? We don't want to see 3% of our youth suffering from fatal overdoses. Or not 3% of our youth, but 3% of the people who are overdosing are in the 14 to 18 age range, to clarify. Okay, so it's not 3% of youth. It's among everyone who has suffered a fatal overdose, youth make up 3% of that. And when I'm talking about youth, I will clarify what age ranges I'm talking about tonight, because sometimes when we talk about youth or we see reports of youth, especially when it comes to substance use, we might be looking at rates of youth under 18. We might actually be looking at data for youth all the way up to age 24. So it's important that we understand what we're talking about when we talk about youth. The other thing to understand is that the majority of people who are suffering from fatal overdoses in our county and from non-fatal overdoses are the adult population. So 30 to 34, unfortunately, are the age ranges that are suffering the most and from fatal overdoses due to fentanyl. And we do have an issue of fentanyl and methamphetamine combined that is affecting an older population primarily. And we are seeing, and we do want parents and youth to be aware that stimulants are often containing fentanyl now and have been. And so methamphetamine is something that we've seen in Washington County for quite a long time, and it hasn't gone away. And we do see a combination of fentanyl and methamphetamine overdoses. We're also seeing fentanyl mixed in with things like cocaine. So we want youth to be aware that use of stimulants is not any safer than a use of an opioid. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so here we can see from the state unintentional drug overdose reporting system that's shared from the CDC, we can see rates by age of fatal overdoses nationwide and in Oregon. And here you'll see that the age ranges actually do go from 15 to 24 for the youth, and then the under 15. So you can see those at the top. And again, as we've seen with our local data, the majority of people who are being affected by an unintentional fatal overdose are in the adult population, much older than we might think. But the youth are being affected at higher rates than we've ever seen before. And that is why they need much more information and education around how to keep themselves safe. Because even though rates of substance use are down overall among our youth from what they have been in the past, the danger of substance use, of experimenting with any type of substance, is higher than it has ever been. And the danger of a fatal overdose is very real. And it's something that our youth need to be made aware of, and parents need to be aware of, so that we can talk to our kids about this. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And so that's some of the data and some of the sort of baseline of where we are and what we're facing in our communities. And that's just a little bit of what we're dealing with. And I know Heather will go into more later. But what I'd like to talk about next is, what can we do about it? Now, I'm a mother of a 15-year-old boy, and I am right in the thick of it with other parents who are facing these hard conversations with our kids, who is worried about my son and his safety and his friends and their safety and all of our youth. And what we know is that we actually have some proven evidence-based strategies that we can employ immediately to help protect our youth from a fatal overdose, from engaging in risky behaviors like early substance use and underage substance use. And so that's what we're going to talk about next. And again, we'll have time for questions after the presentations tonight. So please, I would love to engage in a conversation about this more as well. But to begin with, one of the most important things, in fact, the most important thing that we can do for our youth to protect them against any type of risky behavior, including substance use, is to make sure that they have positive relationships with adults. And hopefully that is with people in their household, parents or caregivers, and also with adults outside of the house. Because when they can have positive adult relationships with teachers, coaches, faith leaders, community members, those are ways that build the strength and resilience of our youth. We also want to encourage delayed use. And the reason that we talk about delayed use rather than no use is because we know from, for example, when I was growing up, we had a lot of abstinence-only messaging around drugs and alcohol, just say no. And we had a lot of fear-based messaging. And we saw, the data showed that that didn't work as well as we wanted it to. In fact, sometimes it backfired. And so what we want to do, and what we know works now, is when students know that their brains are still developing, when our youth understand how drugs and alcohol will affect them differently at a young age than it would an adult, they can make better choices. And they are making better choices. We also want to then provide them with the honest and factual information. In fact, when I talk to kids in the classrooms, I share with them that drug and alcohol substance use overall is going down among youth. And I ask them why they think that is. And they tell me it's because we have more information. And they're 100% right. They have better information, more accurate information, and we're talking to them about it more. So they can make informed decisions about their own health and well-being. And they're doing better than my generation did and when a lot of previous generations. We also need to be sure to develop healthy coping skills for our kids. We ourselves can work on always developing better coping skills, developing stress management skills. We need to help our kids actually learn problem solving and coping skills because it's not something that we're all just born knowing how to do. And so those are some of the strategies that I also help kids talk about and learn when I go into the classroom. And that's something that we as caregivers and parents can be doing as well. And the next slide. And then we want to increase positive activities in school, in their community. This may look like being involved in clubs and activities at school, a team. It could look like doing after-school activities. It could look like volunteering, being involved in a faith community, all sorts of different ways that we can help our youth engage and connect in positive relationships with peers that will influence them in a positive way and with other positive adults. We want to also be sure that we're sharing our own expectations and that they understand that we actually don't want them to use substances. So one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, I don't think kids are listening, or maybe teenagers don't really care what their parents think. And actually, there's data to prove otherwise. One study by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration found that 80% of teenagers said that their parents' disapproval of their underage drinking was the number one factor that they considered when deciding whether or not to drink underage, right? So when we know, when we can communicate with them that we care about their health and why it's important for them not to engage in substance use, they will listen and they will take us seriously. Now, they may not look like they're listening, but they are. And trust me, I have a 15-year-old, so I know. We also need to make sure that we notice and we ask about any type of changes in behaviors, changes in friend groups or associations. And one thing that I like to point out about this is it's important that we understand and engage and are curious about what our kids are doing both online and offline. We should be taking an interest and we should be kind of paying a lot more attention maybe sometimes to what they're doing in both their online world and their offline activities so that we can notice if there is a change and we can get curious and ask them about it and make sure, because that is often an indicator that something's going on that we need to pay attention to. Another thing that we need to focus on as the adults in the household is securing medicines and alcohol so that our youth can't take them without permission or accidentally come across them, or sometimes maybe a friend might be taking them. I'm going to talk more about why this is so important in just a minute. All right, the next slide, please. So one of the things that is key to the reason that we want to share factual, honest information with our kids and share with them the rates of student substance use and let them know that most students don't do drugs, most students aren't drinking, is because of how social norms work. Everyone wants to fit in with their peer group. As a human being, that's sort of what we're geared to do. And adolescents more so than adults even. So when we think our peers are doing something, when we think that this is the norm, that this is what everybody else is doing, we're going to be more inclined to do that thing. When students think that their peers are drinking or taking drugs in high rates, and they have a perception that use among youth is common, they will be more inclined to do it. That's just how social norms work, right? If they understand and know that it actually is the minority, not the majority, that are engaging in substance use, it helps empower them with the knowledge and the skills to be able to say, you know what? I don't want to do that. So let's move on to the next slide. And here's one of the reasons that we need to secure substances in the home and also dispose of unneeded or expired medications, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. And one of the reasons is that we have asked youth where they're getting substances, how they're acquiring substances, and here's what we have found. The majority are getting them from friends and family. And that may look like family members actually giving them substances, and it can also look like them taking them without permission. It can also look like friends sharing substances, handing someone a pill or another type of substance, a vape device, for example, or it could look like them selling them or trading them. We also know that some youth are able to get around rules regarding retail and age restrictions for retail outlets or get somebody older to purchase for them. And we also know that there is a lot of substance sales on the internet, specifically on any type of social media. So anything from Instagram to Snapchat to Telegram. I personally know someone, a 16-year-old who purchased LSD from Instagram and had it delivered to his home, to curbside. And luckily his parents intercepted and were able to stop that from him from taking it. But it's very easy for them to find and purchase any type of substances online. And one of the most dangerous things about how easy that is that a lot of what they're seeing online is actually going to contain fentanyl. If they're buying any type of pill online, the likelihood that it contains fentanyl is really high. So it's not going to be sold as fentanyl. They're going to be told that it's something else like Xanax or Oxycontin or even Adderall. But what we know is that most of those pills contain fentanyl, and that's why it's so dangerous. And we need to educate our youth, and we also need to be paying attention to what they're doing online. Okay, the next slide. Now, something that we want to encourage everyone to have in their home or carry in their car or in their purse or bag is naloxone or Narcan. And especially if you think or know anyone who is using any type of substance, having Narcan or naloxone available to you can really help save a life. We have seen quite a few bystander interventions where bystanders have had naloxone and been able to intervene and reverse an overdose and save someone's life just because they had it in their purse or bag. Narcan or naloxone is the medication and Narcan is one of the brand names. Usually comes in a nasal spray. It's super easy to use. It just works like, any other type of maybe allergy nasal spray. And you don't need special training to use it, although training is available and there are training videos on the next couple of websites I'm going to show you. It's actually everyone who uses Narcan to reverse an overdose, including the person who is being saved with the Narcan, is protected from any kind of prosecution by Oregon's Good Samaritan law. And you can get Narcan without a prescription from almost any pharmacy. There are discount cards that you can use like GoodRx to get a discount on it. It does cost maybe $45 to $50 even with that discount. You can ask your doctor for it, and some insurance will cover maybe some or all of the cost. OHP, anyone on the Oregon Health Plan can get it for free. It's completely covered. There are also some organizations in the area that offer it for free as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so this is one website that Washington County launched recently. It's both a website and we've done a social media campaign. We partnered with Clackamas County on this, and it is all about opioid overdose prevention. So the website is preventdrugoverdose.com. There is a full Spanish language version of the website, and the website has translations into multiple other languages as well. This gives you lots of information about fentanyl, about opioids, and about how to recognize and reverse an overdose and protect ourselves and our children. And this is a great place to visit with teenagers and talk through the information there. There's talking points and guides on this website. And it's a great way for adults, parents especially, to inform ourselves and be a source of information for our youth. On this website also is a video for how to administer Narcan or naloxone. And the next page, please. And also through the county, on the county's website, through our opioids and overdose prevention webpage, there is more information. So we have information on how to recognize and reverse an opioid overdose. We have all the data that I shared with you today is linked from the site. You can find data points, and you can also find resources for treatment, resources for more information, just all sorts of information. So it's a great source of information for you to visit as well. And we'll move on to the next slide when we're ready. Okay, so I mentioned how important it is to dispose of unwanted or unused medication. If you have expired prescriptions or anything that you're not using in any way, shape, or form, even over the counter, the best thing to do, we don't want you to throw it out. We don't want you to flush it because we don't want it in the water system. What we want is to dispose of it safely through the safe drug disposal sites. We have boxes. They're in pharmacies all over. You can go to the website medtakebackoregon.org and find locations for where to safely dispose of medications. There are also, you can talk to police departments. There's biannual drug take back days that you can find through a local police department. So there's lots of ways that we can safely dispose of our medications in the home. Go ahead and next slide. And then just want to wrap it up with reiterating some of the ways that we can approach our teens and talk to them about alcohol and other drugs. And this is the case for both teens and tweens. It's good to start early and have these conversations often. And the way that I think about it is like this. We have safety conversations with our kids from the time they're very little, right? We teach them to look both ways before they're crossing the street, and we teach them not to talk or go places with strangers. And when they get older, those conversations need to shift into other things, right? We need to talk to them about the dangers they face as teenagers. And one of those is the danger of underage drinking, of underage drug use, and specifically nowadays of how incredibly dangerous it is that fentanyl is in all sorts of different substances. And so the way that we do that is we just engage with them in conversation, let them know that we disapprove of underage use of any kind and why, that we're concerned with their health. We want to approach them with empathy and understanding, trying not to be judgmental, but really being an open ear and a resource for them. And if we can't do that for them, we can help them find adults that are that resource for them through their school, through maybe a family member. We also want to make sure that we are good sources of information. So educating ourselves about the dangers of drugs and alcohol, but also about how to protect yourself is really important. And just being the person that they can come to for information, right? Let's go to the next slide. This is a great resource from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. You can go to this website and find guides on how to have these conversations, what to say, when and how to approach your youth, because sometimes it's hard to just figure out how to get that conversation going, especially if we're nervous about it or if we've never had these types of conversations before. And these resources are available in English and in Spanish through SAMHSA. And then the next slide. This is another great resource, both for mental health and for substance use, for families who want support and a network of people who can help guide them and give them ideas about how to talk to their kids, whether or not you are already dealing with maybe a substance use issue, or you need support for someone in your family that is struggling with mental and emotional health, or you just want to learn about it preemptively. And this website and support network is also available in English and in Spanish at ofsn.org. And the next slide. Oh, did we skip one? Oh, is at the very end. So I do have a full resource slide with lots more resources that will be at the very end, along with all of the school resources. So we'll get back to that when we get there. But that's it for me. And then I'll just see you toward the end of the night's presentation. Thanks.
All right. All right. Hello. My name is Officer McBee. I'm a school resource officer with the Forest Grove School District. I'm a full-time sworn officer, police officer in the state of Oregon, and my role is to work inside the schools as a resource for the students and investigate criminal matters that occur within the schools. Next slide. Thank you. All right. So we're going to talk about fentanyl here. So what fentanyl is something that is been coming across our radars as well, and not just the police, but all over social media and things like that over the last few years. Um, to be 100% honest, I have not seen fentanyl inside of our schools here in Forest Grove, but I have seen them with adults, as Jenny had mentioned before. Usually within like the 30 to 34-year-old age range is where we're seeing the fentanyl users. But I have been educating students on fentanyl just because it's around every corner, and we want to make sure that our kiddos know what's out there. So what it is, it's a synthetic opioid drug used to treat pain. It's odorless, tasteless, and colorless. Fentanyl is cheaper than other opioids, but it causes more powerful effects. It's used in different forms, most frequently smoked or taken in pills made to look like legitimate prescription drugs. So the thing with fentanyl is that it looks like any real narcotic that you would get from a pharmacist. And what's happening is these drug manufacturers are getting the fentanyl along with these pill presses that you can get online. And what they're doing is they're creating these pills that are looking identical to real, like oxys, for example. Like on the bottom of the slide here, you'll see a real oxy 30 milligram pill with the fake one on the bottom, which is a fentanyl laced pill, which they call them fentanyls or blues, but fentanyl is primarily the thing there. And the big thing to look at here is with these pill presses, they look identical to real pills. Like they have the scorn mark on the pill, which is a sign that it's a narcotic. They have the 30 on there, which is a dose. And then the M on the back is usually like the pill manufacturer's stamp, if you will. So it could look identical to the same pill that you're getting from your pharmacist, but it has a deadly dose of fentanyl because the people who are making them aren't doctors. They're just basically street dealers who are mixing things together and producing a product, which are these fentanyls. Next slide, please. Okay. Effects of these fentanyl pills is it causes the body not to feel pain. It's an overwhelming sense of extreme happiness as a major reason why people take them. Um, they'll have a sedative or sleepiness like demeanor and feeling. They'll end up having problems breathing and unconscious, and then turn into unconsciousness, and that's where the overdose comes in. And the big thing with the fentanyl pills, excuse me, is that fentanyl was originally created to treat extreme trauma patients, like at car accidents or gunshot wounds or something very extreme like that. And what it is that the medical professionals would administer this on scene just to sedate them enough to get them to surgery. And so with the fentanyl, usually it wears off in about an hour and a half, right? But it's so powerful that that's where people get addicted to it and they continue to use and use and use because it wears off in about 90 minutes. So that's where these overdoses are becoming so prevalent, is because they're just self-medicating and there's really no way, there's no top to it. It's just, unfortunately, they nod off, they become have troubles breathing, and then become unconscious and pass away. Next slide. Okay. So these are some signs of overdoses, right? So um, usually when people are under the influence of a narcotic, especially something similar to fentanyl or oxy, they're going to have a small constricted pinpoint type pupil. They're going to start, what you may hear is on the nod or nodding off. And really what that is that they're falling asleep. Their body, their respiratory system is slowing down to such a degree that they fall asleep, their heart stops beating, and then they pass away. Other signs could be, choking or gurgling sounds, um, like limp body, obviously, or pale blue skin color. And that's a really big sign, is the paleness usually, and then obviously the blue because they're having problems breathing. And sorry. Next. Okay. So no, we're good. So I really want to touch on the Narcan or the Noxalone, that we talked about before. That has saved a lot of lives, and I've seen it used on multiple occasions. And the good thing with the Narcan is that sometimes you don't know if they're experiencing an overdose or maybe some other kind of medical emergency. But if you have the Narcan, it's not going to hurt them at all to use it. So a lot of times I've found myself in the field as a patrol officer, not in the schools, but in the field on the streets as a patrol officer, use Narcan just as a first step in someone who appears to be suffering from an overdose, but maybe also having a stroke or a heart attack, because the Narcan is so instantaneous that it'll snap them out of that overdose. And the thing is too is time's not on our side, so we want to use that Narcan as soon as possible, to counter the overdose. And if it's a heart attack or something different, then we'll address that. But we at least know it's not an opioid overdose. Yeah. See if we have some other slides here. Thanks. Okay. Okay, yeah. So why is it so dangerous? Like I talked about before, it's extremely potent and was really created in labs for the most extreme medical conditions. Um, but fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. Just for an example of like maybe some drugs that you're more familiar with. Um, one pill can literally take a life, and that's not a catchphrase. That's a fact. And in another one of my slides here, I can show you the amount that is needed to be a lethal dose. And like I said, they're also mixed with other drugs. Like aspirin and stuff like that, or with methamphetamine or within heroin and stuff like that, because what they're doing is it's very cheap for them to get, and the product is very addictive, so they're going to have the customers continue to come back to them. Yeah, next slide, please. Yes. So, example of most overdoses aren't like the typical. I hate to use the word typical or normal, but it's not the typical drug user or addict that you might expect to see on TV, or something that you might be very judgmental about. Things like that. Usually, it can be somebody who, in a lot of cases, were medically prescribed an opioid for an injury, and then what happens is the body can become so addicted to that narcotic that it's not just a mental, it's a physical addiction. So they're not able to get out of bed. They're not able to have normal, you know. Bowel movements, things like that. I'm sorry, it's not so pretty, but that's why the reason it comes be so addictive is because a lot of these people, they have jobs, they have families, they have things and responsibilities, and they'll be bedridden. Going through that detox if they don't have something to get their hands on. And unfortunately, those, not unfortunately, but those narcotics prescribed by a doctor usually comes to an end at some point, like after you're healed up. And then what happens is they're so addicted to the opioid and the narcotic that they then turn to something like fentanyl, or they're buying drugs on the street that they think are the Oxy 30s or the Xanax pills that they had been prescribed by the doctor for so many years, but they're actually these laced pills with fentanyl that look identical to a prescription drug, and it takes their life unbeknownst to them what they're really taking. Yeah. So a good slide here. Yes, thank you. So this is a good visual of what a lethal dose of fentanyl looks like. So obviously this has been zoomed in with a microscope, but that's it. Um, it's almost like a dust particle is all that it will take to overdose. And again, it's odorless, it's tasteless. So it's not like you walk into a room and you smell a chemical. No, it's, you should step out and away. You really don't know until it's too late. Next slide. Okay. Do we have it in Forest Grove? Yes, we do have it in Forest Grove, but I'm not seeing it in the schools. And I just want to be very clear on that I haven't come across it from the schools. But how I look at things is, how are we going to prepare for when we do, and how can we educate kids now? Let's not wait until we have a problem. Let's try to meet it at the beginning of it. So dealers are targeting teenagers and young adults. Most dealers are using social media, like Jenny had said before, to connect. So it's not like when maybe in our generation where you knew somebody and they had a friend, or and a friend and a friend. They're going directly online to like Snapchat, TikTok, things like that, to get paraphernalia, to get these drugs, to buy these pills. And Telegram is a good example of a website that I was made familiar with, or it's a platform that I was recently made aware of, where a student had purchased some marijuana on this Telegram app. And basically, you go on this app and you can search for, or you just kind of type in like a search engine, what is it you're looking for, whether it's drugs, whether it's anything. And these dealers will then start messaging them back. And this dealer delivered it to Forest Grove, like a block from her house. And this is as a parent, and as a police officer, this was the first time that I heard about this. So again, it's so important to have those conversations with your kids, because you may know a lot about the drugs and the effects that they can have on you, but they're going to also know a lot about how they're getting access to them and things like that. So that's where those conversations are really key. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. So what can we do? So there's things we can do. So like I said, the parent-child communications is big. As a parent, a wise man told me once that a good time to have those maybe awkward conversations with your kiddo, or the ones that you might feel a little uncool about, are in the car, because they can't get away from you. Right? They can't kind of roll their eyes and go upstairs, right? You can kind of work through the problem. So that's a piece of advice that I've used. And so, yes, it's just having that communication with your kids. And then rule setting, right? So like, underage drinking is not accepted in our house, right? So, like as said before, if you're setting those ground rules, they're going to be less likely to pick up that bottle or to pick up that substance and use it, because they don't want to disappoint mom and dad, or they know that there's some consequences to that, which is their health, their safety, and their well-being, really. So I think approaching it that way, more than "you're going to get grounded, I'm going to take your social media away," is going to be a better approach to them understanding you have their best interests at heart. And monitoring social media, right? So monitoring their phone, you know, if who's their friends, if they have a new friend group, kind of like, who are they, just things like that. Just paying attention to some of the small things that we're going to kind of give you an idea of what your kiddos are up to. And then lastly, disposing the substances. So at the police department, we have like the drug take back, if you will, is kind of a program that we've called it, where there will be a couple days out of a month where you can bring all your prescription drugs that have expired or you're just no longer using anymore, and dispose of them in a safe manner. Now, if you come across another substance, whether you're not quite sure what it is, or it's marijuana or something that you're sure of, but you just don't want to touch and you don't want in your home, you can always call us, call the non-emergency police department number, and we'll come and we'll dispose of it safely. And what we do is we bring it back to our evidence department, and then it gets taken to an incinerator and disposed of at one point. So that's how we can get rid of these places, because yeah, we don't want to throw them in the garbage can, and we don't want to get them in our waterways. And so the best way would be just get a hold of the police department, and we can get those disposed of for you. Yeah. I think that might be it for me as far as slides go. Let's see. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
okay.
it. Thank you.
We're at the home stretch, so I'll make it quick. And full disclosure, I had a babysitter who's my oldest daughter, and she's at the second round of the playoffs for softball. So yay, softball.
Yay. Let's
Well,
go.
she's not playing, she's watching, but
Oh,
I lost the babysitter. So again, with me, I have a senior in high school. I have a 7-year-old, and I have a 2-year-old. I also have had a couple of students that I have lost to fentanyl overdoses. So and again, they weren't looking to die. They were looking to feel better in the moments of their life that they were in. And I think the more that we can talk about this with you that are here and with our kids, the better. And as Officer Bond said, those difficult conversations, I think the other part that's nice with the car is you're not making eye contact.
yes.
So it's a non-confrontational way to talk. So we have lots of car conversations. So vaping, and I really, with the vaping, a lot of teens are thinking it's safe because it doesn't smell, it smells pretty sometimes. It's really not safe. And the devices, we don't know what it does to the brain yet. And what I tell kids is they're guinea pigs. And as soon as I tell a student, like, you're a guinea pig, and we'll find out in like 15 to 20 years what the effects really are, they don't really like to be guinea pigs and to be the people that are being experimented on. We'll come back to this picture, but just think about which of these are vapes. I showed it to my daughter, who's a senior today, when she was in my office, and she found 2. So I'm glad, but there's more than 2 in that picture. Oops, I don't want that. The air, there actually is not water vapor in the vape. So a lot of students are thinking like, well, it's water, it's not a big deal. It's just this poof of, there's a lot of toxins and heavy metals, which are harmful for your lungs and your brain. And some of those pieces. So when a lot of time, as I'm working with schools and when we're talking about substances, we talk about marijuana, nicotine, and vaping. And I just want to bring it back. The vape is the device. So the vape has the marijuana or the nicotine in it. So whatever is in it is what is being consumed. So it's like if you had a cup, the cup is fine. We're putting stuff in the cup that might not be fine. And it can be more harmful because you do have whatever substance plus all of those toxins that we don't know what happens yet. The same with, so everything with a blue dot from our picture is a vape. So if you don't know what your kiddo is carrying or what they're like, just check it out. And honestly, we don't really use the thumb drives very much anymore. So if your kiddo's walking around with a thumb drive, you might just want to see if it's a legit thumb drive. And one thing I learned in some of the webinars I've been a part, fentanyl has been found in vape cartridges. I think sometimes people think because the vape cartridge looks cleaner that it's safe. Those can be tampered with as well, and they can be sold on the black market or different sites, and they can have fentanyl in them. So it is really important, one, to not use substances, but also to know what we're putting in our bodies. So we did talk about mental health. So a lot of this, and thinking of, sometimes we think of mental health and when we talk about it, we're talking it as a negative thing. I like to think of mental health the same as physical health. What are we doing to stay mentally healthy? Mental health it's like physical health. So say if you go for a walk to do that to stay healthy, what are we doing to keep our mental health healthy and having those conversations? Because everybody does have mental health. It's just where we are on that spectrum of healthy to unhealthy pieces of our mental health. And paying attention. I know teens can be moody, but and watching like when their mood is a little bit different and just asking them. And I know that is hard. And I experience that every day in my own home. And you see changes in their eating. We're just making sure you're asking what they're eating. I know it's easier with elementary age kids, but still asking your teen, what are they eating? Has it changed? And if you're seeing some of those habits, and then the behavior, if there's not sleeping, and just ask. Most of the time you can get a vibe like, are you using substances? And you can get a vibe of your student, of your kid, of what they're doing. Forgetfulness, carelessness, and difficulty concentrating are also some indicators. So just being aware of those pieces. And then also those physical pieces. And again, your kids need you as they get older. And I know it is hard. I find the range my 2-year-old's needs are really not that much different than my 18-year-old's needs. They just say it in different ways. So some of those triggers, right now is a really stressful time for your students. We're ending the school year. I know you're concerned as parents of how they're finishing up, trying to find those ways to have the conversation with them. Again, I know it's hard to have that conversation where you're expressing concern, and meeting them where they need you. Also, athletics and activities is a tricky one. It is something that is helpful, and it reduces risk. And there's so much pressure with athletics and activities of interest that it can be a stressor. And if you have a senior right now and they're making that transition, we'll talk a little bit more about those transition and life changes. If they're making that transition where they've been an athlete and involved in something for the last umpteen years and they're not going to pursue that after high school, just be really sensitive, because that's going to be a major life change for your student. The social stresses, exclusion looks different now for kids than it did for us growing up. So it's happening on social media, and they get that exclusion, even if it's not, they're sitting with somebody in person. Family stress or trauma is an impact, social media, different traumatic events, and also moving or changing schools. And I know everybody gets excited about summer break, but for some students, that change from having structure every day to not having structure can be a trigger. So just being sensitive to some of those things where you're like, oh yay, it's summer. Not everybody's excited about transitioning from school to summer. Some of the prevention things we're doing in the school. So part of the health education and the standards is talking about making healthy choices, goal setting, the mental health and how to stay mentally healthy. So that is embedded in our health curriculum. So it is important for your student to go to health class and to pass health class. So we will talk about it there. For substance use prevention, I think my daughter's reprogramming my printer. We will have different school events. We had an advisory lesson at the high school where we focused on fentanyl awareness, the parent outreach, like what we're doing tonight. And then we're collaborating with, we have a high school athletic leadership group, and then also our medical pathway students. So we're working with them for some student campaigns of how we can inform and create awareness across the student body, because kids have the best ideas about how to talk to kids. That mental health literacy, so really is having those conversations of how to understand mental health, what it means, how to maintain good mental health. And at Forest Grove, that's one reason I'm really excited to be a part of the Forest Grove community. There is that conversation about reducing the stigma, where it is okay to advocate for yourself and advocate for others if you need support with your mental health. So Forest Grove and the high school are the response for the discipline pieces around substance use. It's really, I've been an educator for over 20 years now, and the bulk of my career, it's been the student gets caught and they're suspended. That's not working all of the time. So we're looking for some different ways to address. Yes, it is concerning since you can't have substances at school. So there is a 5-day suspension where you look at kind of reducing that suspension. 10 days out of school is a long time. So reducing that to a shorter suspension, and then plugging that student in with somebody. So we're using the Teen Intervene curriculum, which is focused on change talk and harm reduction. So talking with that student about the risky behaviors, but really when they're working through that curriculum, they're building a relationship with a trusting adult. And the more that we can help support that building of relationships with trusting adults in the building and students feel safe talking to people, that's really the key of helping to support the underlying causes of why students are using. There's some resources for you as parents, the One Pill Can Kill campaign, dropping the F-bomb. So some tips about how to talk to your students about fentanyl, and then the Stop the Overdose. And I'll put some of these in the link, and we'll also have these on the high school website when we're finished. The resources, in the school, so the counseling department, our administrators are there to support as well. I'm excited to be collaborating with the police department. I think the more that we can work back and forth with each other. We do have mental health care coordinators at the school. And I thought there's something else I had on. I think that was it. And if you're not, I know we reached out to Banks. I don't know if there's anybody from Banks, but or if you're not from the high school, you can find the information on your school's website as well. Okay, I am going to stop recording and stop sharing the screen so we can have questions. Just a second.